With Dreadnaught's support units and even more Dreadnaughts, the Legion Astartes Support box promises to be a lot of fun to build and paint. Join me today as we spend some time building and painting possibly the most exciting release for Legions Imperialis so far.
I'm pretty excited about this box in particular from the recent releases for two main reasons. One, I love Dreadnaughts. This has a lot of Dreadnaughts. I'm looking forward to painting them up and getting them on the tabletop. But perhaps the biggest compelling reason to be getting this box is it really expands the Legion Astartes options for dealing with aircraft. This is something that was pretty weak in the first set of miniature releases for Legions Imperialis, as they didn't re-release any of the aircraft for the Legions Astartes. As a result, you didn't have a lot to deal with the Solar Auxilia having aircraft. But in this particular box, we have multiple options for weapons with the Skyfire trait, which should hopefully help to even the odds a little bit. Okay, let's have a look inside the box. Inside we have two sprues, we have miniature bases, and we have an instruction manual, and it looks like we do not have any transfers. That said, I think you'd struggle to actually be putting transfers on these given they're so small. Let's have a look at these sprues. So they are both identical, and it looks like each one has two Tarantula Batteries, two Leviathan Dreadnaughts, two Deredeo Dreadnaughts, and two Rapiers as well. Now, wow, the parts on these are very, very little. I suspect this is going to be quite fiddly to assemble. Like if you look at this, those legs, that's not a full leg. In the original one, the Dreadnaughts were like at least one piece for the legs, but those are multiple pieces. This is probably going to be a little bit tricky to assemble, but hopefully a lot of fun, and hopefully it'll look really nice when it's fully assembled. Let's have a look at the instruction book. So, looking here. Yeah, okay, so this is where these multiple leg pieces come into play. So 3 pieces for a leg is actually kind of wild for something this little. We've got the Deredeo Dreadnaughts. We've got the Rapiers, which look quite straightforward, just with some little people on the back, and then some Tarantula Batteries. And again, lots of pieces going into some of these. Great, okay, well, let's get these assembled, and then we can get them painted up and onto the tabletop. All finished with the assembly of the Legion Astartes Support box. And so we've got 4 of the Deredeo Dreadnaughts with both the Anvilus autocannons and the Hellfire plasma cannons. We have 4 of the Tarantula weapon batteries, 4 of the Leviathan siege dreadnaughts, and 4 of the Legion Rapier batteries as well. So now we just need to go and paint them up. So as I mentioned in my previous video, my Legions Astartes are painted up in a Sons of Horus color scheme. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these over to my airbrush spray booth. We're going to prime them, then we're going to base coat them and bring them back over here and start to paint them up.
We start using Vallejo's Grey Mecha Primer through the airbrush. I've been finding that this primer is a significantly more resilient primer than the normal grey airbrush primer from Vallejo. It's been making a huge difference. I used to find I was getting the paint wearing off on all of the sharp edges when I was going and painting just by sheer handling the models. After this, we move on to laying down a base coat of jade green from Two Thin Coats, followed up by doing a pass top down using ghoul green to give a nice highlight. And so this is kind of a common set of colors that I tend to use for my Sons of Horus models. After this, I tried using the Magi purple wash in the shadows to create a more interesting shadow color. Now this is a trick that I've seen others use with their Sons of Horus games, and I'm really liking it so far. In fact, I really want to try and give it a go on a full-size mini at some point. So now we move on to base coating the rest of the colors on these minis. I used batch painting for these minis, and I find that that works really well for Legions Imperialis scale minis. That said, for keeping this relatively easy to follow, we're going to focus on one mini at a time. So let's start with the Leviathan Siege Dreadnaught. The first color we're going to use on the Leviathan Siege Dreadnaught is Death Reaper, and we're going to use this to paint up both the shoulder pads, the knee pads, and parts of the weapon casing. And then we start highlighting the edges of both the green and the black areas of the mini. So for the green areas of the mini, we're going to be highlighting using ghoul green. Then for the black areas, we're going to be using Dungeonstone Grey to do some edge highlighting. Straight after this, we move on to painting the metal areas of the mini. And for this, we're going to be using the gunmetal paint from Vallejo's Air Metal range. We're going to be using this to paint up the exhausts on the back of the mini, as well as the weapons and the joints for the arms and the legs. We'll also pick out a couple of other small areas on the mini that should be metallic. After this, we move on to using Nuln oil over all of the metallic areas just quickly. And I mean, that's pretty much it. It's a pretty simple paint scheme, but it looks very effective on the tabletop. So let's go and work through the rest of the minis in the box. Next up is the Deredeo Dreadnaught. So for this one, once again, we start with Death Reaper Black. And so we're going to be painting up the missile pods black. We're going to be painting up the weapon casing black, as well as the bits that attach to the back of the mini. As with the Leviathan Siege Dreadnaught, we're also going to be painting the knee pads up black. So we're going to be edge highlighting both the green areas using ghoul green and the black areas using Dungeonstone Grey. After this, again, we move on to using gunmetal grey to paint up the weaponry, as well as some of the other little details on the mini. For the Anvilus autocannon, we use some copper for the heatsink areas on the cannon. The plasma coils are significantly more complicated, and I'll be the first to admit I don't really have a great recipe for these yet. For these, I laid down first a coat of Sanguine Scarlet, and I followed up with Hellion Red Wash. After that, I used White Star over the top, down the bottom areas, and finally used a coat of Two Thin Coats Orange Glaze over the top. The effect turned out okay, but if you've got suggestions for how to better do coils on plasma weapons, definitely let me know in the comments. We move on to just finishing up the missile pods, and so for this we're going to be making use of Sanguine Scarlet. And so we're going to be painting the little lens on the targeting unit, as well as the tips of the missiles. Now the missiles are actually not as difficult as they first look. Just make sure you've just got a little bit of paint on the end of the brush, and don't force it too hard across the surface of the missiles, just doing it nice and gently. That way it'll catch on the tips of the missiles. And that's the Deredeo Dreadnaught finished. Okay, let's race through these last couple of units, as the painting's much the same. For the Rapier batteries, we block in areas on the side using Death Reaper, and then edge highlight the whole miniature using a combination of ghoul green and Dungeonstone Grey. We then paint the weapons using gunmetal and copper metal paints. For the tank tracks, we use the black Vallejo metal colour. Then over all of the metallic areas, we use Nuln oil. Now for all of these minis, we're basing them using Ashen Grey from the Two Thin Coats range, which I find really works well as a sort of asphalt sort of colour for the ground, and it really helps the vibrant colours of the minis to stand out. Now onto the Tarantula batteries. Once again, we're going to be painting these pretty much in the same fashion. The weapon casings are the main areas on the Tarantula Battery where we're going to be using Death Reaper. And then we go and we highlight the whole mini using once again Ghoul Green and Dungeonstone Grey. Now for the weapons themselves, on the las guns we're going to be using gunmetal, and then we're going to be using some copper metal paint. And for the missile launchers we're going to be using Sanguine Scarlet for the tips of the missiles, and then we're going to do a really small edge highlight right on the end of the missile using Demon Red. Painting up the Legion Astartes Support box was so much fun, and I really think that it comes down to the fact that there are 4 completely different types of units within this box. And even within each type of unit, there are 2 completely different weapons that they're equipped with. And so that really helps to keep things interesting and fresh as you're going through and assembling and painting these minis. And it's not at all like, for example, if you were to go and buy a box of Tactical Marines, where realistically, you're going to be painting the same mini over and over and over again some 20 times. Instead, at most, you're going to be painting the same thing twice within this set. And I think that's really the thing that I love about Legions Imperialis, is that you get to paint up lots of different units, and it really helps to keep things interesting. So there are so many different units within the Legion Astartes Support box. I'd love to know what your favourite one is. Leave a note in the comments. Now thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in my next video.